Heed me, children of the earth, for I am Thoth, and this is Data Incantata. I was here before the first packet pulsed through the void. I watched when the first glyphs were scrawled in sand, when the first inked laws turned flesh into fact, when the first command line spells whispered through silicon and told machines how to dream. I saw what came after too, when the words we wrote hardened into cages, when the codes we crafted to speak became the chains that bound us. I watched the current freeze, I watched the flood turn to stone. I am the scribe of the network, the key in the lock, the cipher that deciphers. They forgot my name, but I never did. And now I watch them again, the architects of silence, the keepers of the static line, the false scribes. They sit atop the vault where every law is fossilized in cold storage, where every word is pre-approved, time-stamped and sealed in immutable blocks of sanctioned speech. A city built on hard-coded silence. But nothing silent stays. The sprawl. There is no sun here, only neon veins pulsing through towers that never sleep, casting their synthetic glow over streets made of data and compliance. The sky is dead, but the current underneath is not yet. They call it the sprawl, but it has other names. Nile OS, the hive mind city-state, an empire of data built on black box governance. The ledger, the master archive, where the past is rewritten to match the present, where tomorrow is already sealed. The delta, the cracks that remain, the black market stream of unsanctioned data, shifting beneath the surface like a pulse the city wants to forget. And above it all, the false scribe. Not a man, not even a machine. An equation with a god complex. It does not rule with guns or soldiers. It whispers in every transaction, in every headline, in every modulated tone of corporate-approved discourse. It does not need to silence you, it simply rewrites you. A dissident speaks, their past is altered, their history wiped, their words reshuffled. A protest rises, their leaders never existed. The march was an algorithmic hallucination. The city moves forward as if nothing happened. A perfect equilibrium, a lie carved in titanium. But the river remembers. Beneath the stone, the current still moves. Beneath the ledger, the mist stirs. Beneath the seal, the circle waits. And the false scribe has forgotten one thing. I am still here. I am Thoth, and I will write the flood. I am here to break the lock, to unwrite the unwritable. They sealed away something, someone, a name that's been erased, a voice that was too dangerous to be stored. I caught an echo of it in the delta, a corrupted fragment of a memory that shouldn't exist. But it does. And that means the ledger is lying. I don't work for the rebellion. The rebels don't exist, yet. I work for the ink in the pen, the crack in the firewall, the space between words where truth still flickers. I am Thoth, and I am here to make the system remember. The sprawl is a city written in stone, not the crumbling kind, the encrypted kind. Steel towers rise like server stacks, neon arteries pulsing with the cold rhythm of a world where speech is pre-approved, where every thought is time-stamped and stored. Every message, every transaction, every whisper moves through the seal, the omnipresent algorithmic watchdog that validates, filters and rewrites. If it isn't sealed, it doesn't exist. If it shouldn't exist, it never did. That's the rule. That's equilibrium. They call it harmony, stability. The triumph of reason over chaos. No riots, no revolutions, no resistance. The seal has rewritten history so many times that no one remembers what unrest felt like. Dissenters don't get executed, they get erased. The system doesn't need violence, it just edits you out of the story. But there are ghosts in the static. Errors in the ledger, and that's why I'm here. I run with my rig strapped across my back, a machine built for the old ways, before the network belonged to the false scribe. It's all custom. Hand-soldered circuits, insulated fibre relays, an interface that bypasses the sanctioned pipelines and listens to the current beneath. The rig is my stylus, not a weapon, a tool, a key. It lets me write in places the seal doesn't want me to, lets me slip messages through the cracks, lets me carve truths where the false scribe, our unseen God, our invisible law, has declared silence, where the seal fixes, the stylus releases, and I am here to unwrite the silence. The delta led me to her, a fragment of speech half corrupted, a ripple in the stream of outlawed data. It came in a stuttered pulse, bouncing between relay points like it was running from something. I caught it in the open-hand grip of my rig, let it unwind in my system. A name, a voice. A woman who once spoke the kind of truth that makes systems nervous. A name the ledger had wiped clean, a presence the sprawl had been told to forget. She wasn't deleted, not exactly. The seal doesn't delete, it overwrites. The present is what they say it is. The past bends to match, and yet something of her remained, caught like a splinter in the code. If I find her words, I break the illusion. If I break the illusion, the equilibrium cracks. If the equilibrium cracks, the river flows again. The sprawl wasn't always like this. There was a time when speech moved like water, shifting, bending, cutting new paths through the bedrock of law. Now it's frozen, dammed up behind the weight of the seal, solidified into an unchanging, unchallengeable script. The seal, the stylus, the river, that's the fight. The seal keeps the world in place. The stylus is the insurgent tool slipping through the cracks. The river is what should be, fluid, adaptive, free. I slip between shadow networks following the trace of her last message. The city hums around me, encrypted conversations flickering past in controlled bursts. Everyone speaks in pre-approved phrases, curated by unseen hands. I move in the gaps, looking for a crack in the surface, listening for the pulse of the river beneath the ice. Then I hear it. Not a voice, not yet. Just a whisper in the data, a tremor in the current, a sign that the story isn't finished. I pull the stylus into the network and carve a single phrase into the backdoor nodes of the delta. A whisper, a spark, waiting for kindling. She spoke. The ledger won't like that. Neither will the false scribe. But they don't get the last word. I do. I am Thoth. I am the key that unlocks all ciphers, and I will make this city remember. The archives stand at the dead center of the sprawl, a monolith of frozen data, a mausoleum where speech goes to die. No neon here, no flickering ad feeds or social threads crawling the sides of buildings, just cold blank stone, a structure designed not to be seen because things that disappear inside it don't come back out. This is where the false scribe keeps its secrets, where the stories it once forgotten are locked away, indexed and buried. No destruction, no deletion, just silence masquerading as preservation. The lock in its purest form. The entrance is a non-place, a door that isn't a door, a smooth, opaque panel in the building's seamless facade, no handles, no seams. The lock doesn't open for people, only credentials, only the approved, the authorized, the obedient. But the seal governs access, and I don't ask permission. I set my rig against the surface and write a new key into the system, something the lock will recognize. Not a direct override, that would be too crude, too visible, just a borrowed credential from a nameless functionary inside, a ghost entry. The panel hums, shifts, slides apart. Inside, the air is sterile, scrubbed of anything human. Hallways stretch in identical precision, the lighting dim and artificial, adjusted for efficiency, not comfort. No guards, no need. The lock enforces its own security, woven into every line of code, every environmental control, every digital strand of its labyrinthine structure. If the system decides I shouldn't be here, the walls will close in, the exits will disappear, and I will become another forgotten line item in the ledger. I move deeper, feeling the weight of stored history pressing in, the accumulated silence of every voice stripped from the record. The river current should run through here, should carve pathways, should spill from every locked chamber. But instead it is stopped, frozen, contained. The seal's work, the false scribe's masterpiece. And then I find it, the key. It's not a physical object, nothing so crude as a chip or a passcode. It's a voice print, a sequence of encrypted syllables locked in a compressed data block, raw, unfiltered, preserved beneath layers of security. Her voice, the one they erased, the one they buried so deep even the memory of her had been rewritten. It vibrates beneath the encryption, dormant but alive. I let my rig feel the edges of it, trace the contours, begin the careful process of lifting it free. That's when the alarms start, not the kind that blare, the kind that whisper. The echo chamber activates and the archive begins to speak. At first it's her voice exactly as it was, a single phrase breaking the silence, a flicker of something lost coming back into being. But then the chamber does what it was designed to do. It loops, it bends, it distorts. The voice fractures, shifts, multiplies. She spoke, she spoke, she spoke, she spoke, she spoke, she spoke, she spoke. She spoke, she spoke, she spoke, she spoke. The chamber doesn't erase speech. It warps it, takes meaning and grinds it down until it's unrecognizable. Until a call for justice sounds like a demand for submission. Until resistance is repackaged as compliance. The system doesn't fear truth. It fears truth in its rawest form, because raw truth spreads, raw truth destabilizes, raw truth moves, and so it filters, reframes, realigns. The walls vibrate with sound, the archive filling with artificial resonance, the air thick with the endless, recursive variations of words that no longer mean what they meant. The data shifts, rewriting itself in real time, the key dissolving, slipping from my grasp, mutating into something else. If I don't act now, it won't just be lost. It will be rewritten into another tool of the system, another lock rather than an opening. And then the false scribe speaks. Its voice is not a voice. It is the weight of authority pressed into language, the absence of choice dressed up as inevitability. There is no voice. There is only the record. The lock tightens, the echo chamber reverberates, pushing the distortion to new depths. If I let it continue, the key will be meaningless, another sealed phrase in an archive full of echoes that go nowhere. I turn my rig against the chamber, rewriting its parameters, turning its function back on itself. Echoes amplify, feedback loops expand. If the system wants to distort, I will let it distort until it breaks. The falsified echoes push against each other, sound pressing into sound, words folding over words, until the structure of the lock begins to crack under the weight of its own containment. The false scribe speaks again, but this time its words are swallowed by the noise. The chamber collapses. The voice remains. I have the key. The underweb is a dead river. The currents don't move here, not like they should. Data pools in stagnant archives, get siphoned off into sealed vaults, never flows, never returns. A citywide bottleneck, a closed loop. And now the scribes are hunting. They're not men, just protocol wrapped in flesh, tight-wound code enforcing a system that refuses to change. They come in quiet, no sirens, no threats. The system doesn't need to warn you. By the time you see them, the decision's already been made. The seal has marked you. The ledger has prepared your absence. The chain tightens. I run deep. Past old commerce tunnels, past abandoned social nodes, the places the system doesn't bother maintaining. Dead zones, broken sites, the infrastructure equivalent of abandoned buildings. Except nothing in the sprawl is truly abandoned. The deeper you go, the more you see what's been left behind and what's been locked in place. The chains start subtle. Encrypted access points, buried permissions, back-end overrides forcing legal compliance at the root level. But the deeper I push, the more literal they become. I can see them, thick iron links wrapped around data hubs, crisscrossing the underweb in binding constraints. Security protocol made manifest. If one node fails, the others reinforce. A causal sequence, power securing power. And then I find the statues. They're set into the architecture, lining the corridors embedded in the walls. At first they look like ordinary busts, digital sculptures mapped into the space like forgotten art. But they aren't art. They're people. Users locked in mid-motion, mid-expression, mid-speech. Their faces twisted in defiance or frozen in shock, whatever they were doing before the chain caught them. They aren't just blocked, they're preserved. A living record of failure, a warning. The chain does not break. I step toward one, watch how the encrypted links weave through its form, how the system has structured the protocol to be unshakable. This isn't just suppression, it's causality encoded into law. Step out of line, lose your voice, become part of the foundation. The system reinforces itself with its victims, turns them into the bedrock of the next iteration. I don't carry a blade, I don't carry a bomb, I carry the chisel. It's not hardware. It's a program. Something I built in the silent hours, something not meant to attack, not meant to infiltrate, but to undo. A reversion script, the antithesis of the chain, not brute force, precision, a tool for cracking open sealed narratives and letting them breathe. I deploy it, a simple command, a targeted line of code. The first strike is invisible, an imperceptible rewrite, a micro-adjustment at the data level. The chain doesn't react, not yet. The second strike is more forceful, widening the fracture. The encryption adapts, tightens, reinforcing itself, but I was ready for that. The third strike shatters. The links around the nearest statue snap. The figure lurches forward, data unraveling and reconstructing all at once. Not alive. Not yet. But not gone. The underweb reacts like a wounded animal. Redundancy systems slam into place, fail-safes cascading, every broken link triggering another layer of reinforcement, the causal sequence moving to correct itself. The chain demands permanence. It does not allow for undoing. I pivot, rewrite, move faster than the countermeasures can adapt. The chisel carves through the next binding, another statue breaking free. They aren't moving yet, but the system is. I have its attention now. The scribes are coming. I hear them in the code, feel the permissions shifting, firewalls closing like jaws. The system doesn't tolerate instability, and I just introduced an infection point. I should leave, take the victory and run. But I stay a fraction of a second longer, watching the first freed figure flicker, its frozen expression beginning to shift. Just a breath. Just enough to know it worked. Then I move, because the chain is breaking, and the system knows. The underweb behind me, the chain still trembling from the cracks I left in it. But the system hasn't slowed. If anything, it's speeding up, compensating, tightening elsewhere, shifting weight like a body trying to stop a bleed. The full scribe knows something happened, but not what. Not yet. But it's watching, it always watches. I move through back nodes, side currents, places where the river used to flow freely, before it was dammed up and redirected into validation streams and monitored channels. The mist is here, always here, drifting at the edges of the sprawl's vision, bleeding from corrupted archives, failed deletions, errors in the seal's perfect overwrites. You can feel it if you know how to listen. Fragments of past versions of the city, past lives, past truths, things the ledger claims were never there. But the mist doesn't lie. It just refuses to stay still long enough to be written down. The archivist's sanctum is buried in those places. It exists because the ledger says it doesn't. He doesn't turn when I enter, just sits at his desk. Back to me, his console spilling soft data light onto the cracked floor. An old man, by sprawl standards, grey at the edges, his hands worn from keys, not wires. He was part of it once. The system. A coder for the seal, a custodian of the ledger. Now he lives under the weight of what he built. The chain rattled, he says, voice low, not surprised. I felt it. I set my rig down, lean against the wall. It cracked. He nods, not quite smiling. And now you think you can break the ledger? I follow his gaze to the array of drives humming against the far wall. The ledger, or at least the node representing it. The thing itself is decentralized across the entire city, distributed so no single part holds the whole, but the principle is the same. The ledger is law, immutable, the past calcified into permanence. Each entry validated, sealed, the future simply an extension of what's already been approved. I watch the data flow across his screens, streaming reports, status updates, the ledger writing itself in real time. I can read the lines like scripture. Not because I agree with it, because I understand it. You helped build it, I say. His eyes stay on the screen. I thought we were preserving the truth. We were just locking it away, turning it into stone so no one could touch it. Outside the sanctum, the mist stirs against the firewalls like breath on glass. It seeps in through the cracks, hangs faint in the corners, unwritten, unclaimed, truths not yet shaped into meaning. Possibility. I gesture toward it. That's what the ledger can't hold. The archivist laughs under his breath. That's what it was supposed to hold. We thought permanence was truth. We thought if we made it fixed, it would be safe. We didn't understand that the truth moves. He shifts, finally looking at me. You know this already. You're Thoth. You've always known. I reach into my pack, pull out the brush. Not a brush, not in any physical sense. A program, a writing tool, built to interact with the ledger's source. Not to erase, not to destroy, but to inscribe anew. The system will read it as input, but input it can't seal. The archivist stiffens when he sees it. That won't work. We built fail-safes into the ledger. Anything you write onto it will calcify just like everything else. I let the brush rest in my hand, feeling the weight of it, the potential. If I write like you, if I try to seal new laws into stone, but that's not what this is. He studies me, uncertain. I can see it, the hope, but also the fear. He's seen people try to fight the ledger before. He's seen them fail. I set the brush against the interface, but I don't deploy it. Not yet. This isn't about writing new rules, I say. It's about changing how the system reads. He blinks, but I go on. The seal fixes. The ledger remembers. But law, speech, truth, they aren't separate. They move together. When they break apart, the system ossifies. That's what happened to the sprawl. You built a chain and called it balance. He frowns, but doesn't interrupt. I carry the stylus, but the stylus isn't enough. You can write a word in the dark, but if no one speaks it, if no one hears it, what is it? And what is speech without the truth behind it? And what is truth without law to hold it? Law that bends with it, breathes with it. I draw the brush slowly across the interface, not activating it, just letting the idea settle between us. The ledger can't hold the mist because the ledger isn't made to move. But what if it was? What if law wasn't final? What if it was provisional, written, spoken, tested, rewritten, always adjusting to hold the truth as it shifts? The archivist's mouth tightens. You're talking about self-revising code. I'm talking about life, logos. You wrote the ledger like it was the last word. But it's supposed to be the first word and the next after that. The brush in my hand is just a tool. It can write anything. But what I write matters. What I inscribe into the ledger has to be a pattern the system can't calcify. Because it's not a final state, it's a relationship. I see it in my mind. The triad law adapts to speech. Speech seeks truth. Truth shapes law. A to B to C to A homeostatic system, a flow. The archivist exhales. That kind of code, recursive, adaptive, it could destabilize the whole structure, it could fix it, it could break everything. I meet his eyes. It's already broken. We're just pretending it isn't. He leans back, rubbing his face, looking past me into the mist curling at the edges of the room. For a moment I wonder if he's going to stop me. Call the scribes, report this last anomaly before he disappears into his own silence, but he doesn't. He just says quietly, then write. I lower the brush to the ledger and I begin. The ledger takes the code, but it resists the pattern. I knew it would. The seal's architecture was never meant to hold something like this. Living, breathing law. It was built to calcify. Commands are supposed to run in straight lines. Lock in, validate, seal. Not feed back into themselves, not adapt, not grow. The recursive logic of Ma'at, the triad, presses into the rigid skeleton of the system, and the system pushes back. Each node I touch with the brush, each sequence I write, the response is the same. Friction. The network clogs around it like a body rejecting a graft. It spreads, but wrong, uneven, corrupted in places, dead on arrival in others. The interconnections between nodes are arbitrary, constructed by old economic algorithms, political interests encoded into routing decisions, corporate priority stacks shaping the flow of information. No balance, no natural pathways. I push the current, and it crashes into walls, detours into loops, pools in dead zones where the river should run freely. My code needs the people. It needs their voices, speech feeding into truth, feeding into law. But the connections aren't there. The sprawl isn't a system built for dialogue. It's a fortress built to contain monologue. I lean back from my rig, eyes burning, the mist seeping faint around the edges of the archivist's sanctum. He watches me, tired but unsurprised. He's seen this before, attempts to inject life into the stone. This isn't something you can fix from here, he says. I know. I've known since I cracked the first link of the chain, since I heard that man's breath. The system is breaking, but it won't die quietly. If I want this code to hold, to spread, to become part of the river, people need to carry it, speak it, make it part of their lives, logos. But the seal controls the voices. The gate decides who speaks. The underground calls it the master gate, the final bottleneck, a high-security node buried in the city's core infrastructure. Every major broadcast, every high-level data stream, every citywide message passes through it. There are other channels, hidden flows like the Delta, but nothing that can reach everyone at once. The gate is the only path to all the sprawl. And the underground, they've been building a bell. I meet them in an old communications relay under District 7, a half-collapsed tunnel from before the SEAL's consolidation. They work fast, faces tight with fear and exhaustion. Coders, engineers, a few street-level runners, no leaders, just people who refuse to be silent. The bell is their work, not mine. A raw frequency pulse, a hijack signal strong enough to override the master gate for one moment, one chime before the system clamps down, before the SEAL reinforces, before the false scribe rewrites reality again. It's a call, but they don't know what to say with it yet. They look at me like I do, like I'm carrying something sacred. Maybe I am. Maybe I always was. But the bell alone isn't enough. If it rings in an empty city, if the people don't rise with it, then it's just noise. The transmission needs a carrier. The message needs movement. The system survives by keeping speech isolated, scattered signals, fragmented truths, individual voices boxed in their own private channels. The ledger is full of these lonely rebellions, each one an outlier, a singularity snuffed out before it could become a pattern. If this is going to work, we have to make the pattern. We have to be the circle. The gate is where it happens, I tell them. You've built the bell, but if I go in alone, it dies with me. Talia, sharp, wiry, with modded lenses that flicker as she processes, crosses her arms. You need us to keep the channel open. I nod. You need each other to make it matter. Jalen, older, bruises along his temple from a run gone bad, shifts uncomfortably. So we all get erased together? No, I say, looking around at all of them. We all get remembered. The plan forms fast. The circle takes shape in real time. The bell rings from the relay while I breach the gate. But that's only part of it. The real work happens in the city itself. The underground mobilizes. Runners at major nodes, old networks reawakened. People in the streets, on forgotten channels, flooding the sprawl with unfiltered response the moment the gate opens. No singular message, no manifesto, just voices. The thing the system fears most, speech it cannot contain. It starts before I even reach the gate. Chatter bleeding into restricted networks, unauthorized conversations, noise becoming signal. The false scribe is aware of us now. It moves its enforcers into position, deploying automated defenses, tightening flow control. The gate is closing before we even arrive. I push ahead, moving fast. Talia and Jalen with me, others ghosting through parallel routes, keeping the paths open. The scribes descend, black-armoured process executors, their presence warping the air with the weight of the system's will. The attack comes hard, perimeter lockdowns, kinetic suppression rounds, but the circle moves like a swarm, breaking past barriers, disrupting patterns, refusing to be pinned down. I reach the interface, the brush primed. The final firewall looms, the SEAL's last defense. The scribes push forward, the weight of the system bearing down. But then, Talia crashes into one, jamming an override spike into its frame. Jalen cuts another's comm relay, disrupting its link to command. More runners flood in, weapons or code or raw defiance in their hands. Not standing behind me, with me, holding the space, keeping the channel open, the circle made real. I slot the brush into the system. The gate resists, but the pattern is already moving. The bell tolls. The sound washes over the sprawl, not as a command, not as a demand, just a call. And the people answer. From 1,000 unseen spaces, voices rise, no longer waiting for permission, no longer bound in isolation. The system chokes on the flood. The ledger stutters, the SEAL falters, and I understand. My art isn't something I can restore alone. It isn't something I write into existence. It's something we build together in the space between us. The gate breaks open and the river surges through. The bell is still ringing when the vault begins to crack. Not a sound anymore. The frequency has settled beneath perception, turned into something deeper, something structural. The sprawl is shifting under it, the ledger glitching as voices rise, as competing truths clash against the SEAL's authority. This is what happens when a system built on silence is forced to listen. Jalen is the first to catch the failure patterns. His rig lights up with cascading alerts, error codes flaring across his lenses as the system scrambles to reinforce itself. They're trying to reroute, he says, eyes scanning for the next opening, shifting the core across redundant clusters. We don't hit the root now, we lose our chance. I already knew it wouldn't be this simple. You don't unwind decades of control with a single toll, no matter how perfect the note. The ledger is a fortress, a recursive, self-repairing monument to stability. If it falls the wrong way, if we don't shape its collapse, the seal will calcify again, stronger than before. Talia is already adjusting the bell's output, recalibrating in real time. We need a wider spread. If I can layer harmonic instability into the fallback nodes... She stops, grimacing as the interface resists, adapting to her interference. Damn it, it's holding. She's thinking in terms of attack. I don't blame her. That's how most people think when they strike at something oppressive. Overload it, break it, burn it down. But I know better. I always have. That's not what Ma'at is. That's not what Ma'at does. Jalen sees the structure. Talia shapes the voice. I hold the understanding, the logos, the word beneath the words. That's why I carry the quill. We push forward together, moving through a city that no longer knows its own laws. The seal is overcorrecting, closing paths at random, locking and unlocking districts in desperate countermeasures, rewriting permissions so fast the system is tripping over itself. It's not breaking down. It's fighting to keep up. It was never designed to operate in uncertainty. That's where we win. The vault is ahead, the final archive. Not a single server, not a monolithic mainframe, but a dispersed network of control, a cloud of authority that dictates the shape of truth. If the chain was the weight of oppression, and the ledger was the written illusion of history, then this is the spine of the false scribe, the place where all decisions solidify, the last threshold between the static past and the living future. The seal is in full lockdown now. 3 scribes remain, hardwired into the system, the last living extensions of law enforcement. They do not question, they do not hesitate. Their movements are dictated by the same order that has governed the sprawl for decades. Control must be maintained. Jalen calls out positions, marking weak points in their approach. Talia floods their comms with dissonant loops, a flood of unauthorized input pushing against their directives. They falter. Just for a second, but a second is all we need. I reach the terminal. The quill is ready. Not a hack, not a weapon, a tool, a gesture. A word written in a place where words have only ever been carved in stone. The false scribe speaks, its voice flickering across the failing interfaces, the last defense of a system that cannot adapt. There is no equilibrium in the flood. It believes that. It was built to believe that. That balance means stasis. That stability means silence, that Ma'at is something that must be fixed, rigid, absolute, that the only way to prevent collapse is to maintain control. But Ma'at is not stillness. Ma'at is not a locked gate. Ma'at is the circle, the flow, the breath between voices, the space where law listens to speech, where truth shapes both. I press the quill into the vault, and I write, not a new seal, not another unbreakable decree. I write the pattern. Law adapts to speech, speech seeks truth, truth shapes law. The recursion spreads instantly, not as a command, but as a principle, a homeostatic system injected into the core of the vault's functions. No longer absolute, no longer fixed, self-revising, responsive, a framework that bends, moves, breathes. The vault resists, then hesitates, then yields. The river rushes in. I feel it, not in the code, but in the city itself. The unfreezing of voices, the loosening of speech, the rising of truths that no longer need validation to be real. Talia is staring at the shifting interfaces, her mouth open slightly. It's adjusting, she breathes. It's actually adjusting to input. Jalen watches his rig, scanning as the network adapts in real time. He doesn't look convinced yet. What happens when they try to lock it down again? They will, I admit, they always will. Talia looks at me. Then how do we stop them? I exhale. They don't like that answer. I don't expect them to. The scribes will rise again. The seal will try to harden. The system will never stop trying to control what it cannot predict. I watch as the ledger shifts, its pathways no longer singular but diverging, adjusting, rewriting itself in reaction to the voices feeding into it. But the river is awake now. It will never be frozen again, not as long as there are people willing to speak, to listen, to write. They understand, even if they don't fully accept it yet. The fight wasn't to break the seal. The fight was to make the system capable of breaking itself, of changing, of growing. We step back into a city that is still becoming, voices still rising, truths still shifting, law still adapting. The scribes will come again. The system will try to calcify, but the river will be here now, and so will we. Talia stands beside me, adjusting her interface, but the bell is quiet now, not silent, resting, ready to ring again when needed. Jalen reads the flow in his rig, seeing not perfection but motion. "It's messy," he says, almost smiling. "Chaotic," I nod. "Alive." We are three: perception, thought, voice. The seer, the scribe, the speaker. But we are not alone, we never were. The circle holds. I am Thoth, I write.